the popularization that not everybody makes it. I think that is one of the beliefs that, oh, I know this is possible, but I don't think this is possible for me.
Yeah, I don't think it comes from a way of working through the belief as it comes as much through action. And no matter what, you keep persevering. Don't expect to always feel creative. Just show up. Just keep moving. It's hard, I think we all struggle with those places of like, I want to do something different, or I want to, like break out of my little box. We have to learn this level of like detachment around, around what we make. We have to like be willing to release it and be joyful for the time that we did get to spend with that work or whatever.
Welcome to the podcast, Tanmaya. A big welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, it's gray and not exactly beautiful outside, but that requires you to shine internally much more than normal. So, yeah.
I love that. I love how you've put that. Where are you right now?
So, I'm actually located in Indiana. I moved here about over a year ago for a position at the university here. So, yeah, it's been quite a transition in many ways. You're not in the US, I know, but those who are in the US will understand that there are drastic differences between the coastal cities and the cities that are in the Midwest.
And why? What do you mean by that? For everyone who's listening, including me, who don't know.
Yeah, so there's a lot of the from a political stance, this center of the United States tends to be much more heavily Republican. A lot of and then the more sort of external states, so those like on the peripheral, right? So the West Coast, East Coast tend to have more liberal mindsets. So, gun mentality, a lot of those kind of things are very culturally, well, a part of this culture. And it's, to me, it's also, it's not about judging as much as a sense of curiosity around like why people believe in these things or why they take these certain actions. And even myself, I've gone out shooting since I've been here for the first time in my life, and like actually held a gun, and I mean in a range, right? But it's one of those things where um for me to fully like understand where I am, it's like, well, I want to experience, why people might make certain decisions that they do. um and then, I think the other, terrain wise, it tends to be a lot flatter in this middle part, so it's not as fun. So but yeah, it's I think for me as an artist though, the decision to move here, not only for, this particular career opportunity, but it was also because of the fact that it's so expensive in the coastal cities to live. Whereas like here I can buy a house and have much more space, and space is really, really important to me as a creator. Yeah. So that too.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So you've had what do I say? An year of 2023.
Oh, yeah, that's an understatement. Yes.
Let's start from the beginning. I really want to, before we go into, a lot of your thoughts, and I have those questions. But let's start. I want to know more about you in the sense of where do you come from? What's been your story? Did you always want to be an artist? What brought you in the arts? Like, there's so many questions when we look at someone, like, as an artist, we only look at their work. And for me, when I look at someone's work or look at someone as an artist, I'm like, what brought you here? What pulled you out? Um, what was your idea of being an artist? Why are you doing the work that you're doing?
So for me personally, I did always want to be an artist. There was no question in my mind. It was something that like as cheesy as it sounds, I like actually proclaimed to my parents when I was like 7. And since then, yeah, and
And
since then
what was your parents' reaction
everything.
to that?
My parents are very supportive people, so I don't remember any reaction, positive or negative. But I will say that I am fortunate that throughout like my younger years, they did take efforts to like link me with certain artists or people who could mentor me. And I deeply appreciate that. I was born in Washington, D.C., but I actually spent more of my informative years growing up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And for those who are aware of Santa Fe, one of the stats of Santa Fe, at least back in the day, I don't know if it still applies, was that they have the most galleries per capita in the world. And it's a place, where Georgia O'Keeffe and, had come out with Stieglitz in the beginning. And then she ended up staying, Stieglitz didn't. But basically, it's, it became this kind of melting pot for artists, but also it's a very, like growing up there was such an interesting experience from the perspective that you have the indigenous culture, you have the new age culture, or even like the hippies that came out in the 60s. And then you also have the Los Alamos, where the labs are, where the atom bomb was created. So you have this like incredible sort of array of different kind of colliding, but also what I see is weirdly for people to do any of what they do, it requires a level of not only spirituality but creative thinking, right? And
Absolutely.
so yeah, so that was like where I grew up is in Santa Fe, and then I was really privileged in my gosh, I was like in my maybe 16 something in there, and a professor from Yale moved out and opened a grad school there. And somehow I went to this school. I don't know how. I wasn't a grad student. I just took classes from him. And I, up until that point, had never really painted. And the reason being is that I actually made a conscious decision not to. Drawing to me is so, because drawing is just, for myself, is so fundamental to laying a really wonderful groundwork for everything else. And so I would, even as a child, come home from school, finish my homework, and draw until like 3 a.m. in the morning and just practice and practice and practice. And then with him, he, opened my eyes to painting and really gave me the space and also the courage to do bigger things at that time. So I felt really fortunate to have, yeah, to have that exposure. Um, and then, yeah, and then after that, I moved to Kansas City, and I went to the Kansas City Art Institute with a pretty much full ride, but was really unhappy. And it was not just, because of being in Kansas City, but it was also really personal stuff going on in my life. I had a death in the family prior to that, and I was not prepared and lacked in the tools at, age whatever I was, 18 or so, to handle that. And so I then dropped out of school and ended up taking off that summer to Florence and studying painting there and art history. And then I was supposed to transfer to George Washington University, which I had already gotten into, with more of an emphasis on history and academics. And I decided that I was going to travel instead. So
Oh,
I took
so you
off
did?
to, yeah, so I left and I started off just spending a little more time in Europe doing some work in between, like a farm work and things like that. And then I ended up leaving and going to Nepal, and then that ended me in a sojourn through India. And I was
Oh,
there
you've
for
been to
over,
India.
oh, I have definitely been to India. I was there for over a year.
You were here for a year? That is so nice. I have to hear your stories then.
And I was 19 at that time. And so
Did you come to Agra? Did you see the Taj Mahal?
I didn't, which is so weird. I actually ended up doing like the Rajasthan area, but then somehow, like, when I came back, I flew into Calcutta and I never went reversed. And so I ended up
You did
just
not
going
come to the
down the
Golden
coast.
Triangle.
No, no, which is weird. It's one of those things that
Yeah.
happens, when
But
you go
sure, you come back
traveling.
then.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so that was basically it. And then I, came back from that journey and just kept making and creating. And while I was there, I was part of, I went into different ashrams and did that whole thing too. And ended up like making art through all of that time. And my art really changed.
Let's also talk about that experience because I want to ask you in the sense of how even how early and young you were. This is like a this is something I think I am born and brought up raised in India. So I mean, of course, and I think I've over the years I've got spiritually so much more aware and into it. But every now and then this is like a dream, not only if you want to come to India or like ashram or spirituality, but just in general also sometimes we feel like I want to leave everything. And even as artists, sometimes we feel like I want to just leave everything, travel and create or even like live the world. And let's someone who's done it, I want to hear from you, your own experiences, how those experiences, what was that experience? What was the good and not so good part? B, how did it really change you as a person and how then it impacted you, maybe as an artist?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Yes, I know.
I mean, I think to a certain degree, we're always still processing things that have happened in the past, right? Even if we're not aware that it was linked back to X time.
Everything is
I
linked.
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, at that time, I used it as a really huge liberation. So for me, it was going from thinking that art needed to be something that was realistic to realizing that there's ways that I could expand as a creator and tap into otherworldly experiences and then see what comes out of that visually. And so part of that process was almost what I would consider like a deconditioning.
I want to ask you in this, were you someone like were you chasing at that point something particularly? Um or you were not as like you were still open to whatever that experience was, or like sometimes we feel like I was chasing this idea of I will find something meaningful for my work or my art or whatever, or you were just going with the flow like
I wanted to unravel, and I intentionally wanted to unravel. It had nothing to do with, I'm going to be this amazing artist and this is how it's going to translate. It was, how can I unravel so I can come into a greater sense of authenticity with what I do, right? And to do that, it meant that I needed to literally go against everything that I had learned prior. And that meant meeting the canvas daily, not with the intent, like anything that I thought logically that I was going to do. I actually had to force myself to override that. Right. And I came to the canvas from a much more emotive stance. So what emotion am I in today? That's what I'm going to paint. And it doesn't matter if it's compositionally correct. It doesn't matter if the colors are great, all of that kind of stuff. So then when I segued from India and I went to Amsterdam and I was staying with an artist friend there and doing art fairs and other things. And then when I came back to the United States and I was creating at that time, I ended up moving to New York because I wanted to be enmeshed in chaos like India. I miss the chaos, right? And so I was like, I got to go to New York. But the difference was that in India, to me, the heart was so much more the driver than the head. In Even if people are bargaining with you and being kind of scrupulous in India, I feel like it's still coming from this playful heart space. Whereas New York and sort of that it felt very heady and it wasn't as comfortable for me.
And I also think like, there's something also here. I feel like sometimes it's just not where we are, but your I think it's also conditioning because let's say if I'm born and brought up and raised here in India, this may be my comfort zone and also societal or how I'm supposed to, the way I'm raised and my environment and my culture that plays a huge role on how we think and what we do. And the moment, and that's where I think our brain starts to tell us things. Okay, this is what you're meant to do. This is what you need to be doing. But the moment you get out of your comfort zone and in a place that's not your and there's no rule and you do not know the rules and you really have to just be yourself, that is where the heart becomes the predominant versus the mind, because you do not the mind has nothing to tell you because there's no, I think that societal structure. Okay, like even in New York, maybe because you're not, US is a home to you. Once you come back, then there's this constant, okay, this is what you're meant to be doing. Oh, you have to be in New York, you have to be doing this. Versus if you were in India, you didn't know that what you were meant to be doing in India. There's no, you do not know that rule book. I know that. And maybe I think, if I go to US, for me, there's no rule book. I don't know anything. Everything is intuitive and my heart, wherever it takes me, I would do that. Do you think, am I right?
Well, I mean, I'm talking, I think, more from the stance of like how it impacts one creatively versus like the conditioning of family or culture. It's to me, like, just to further that story, I actually ended up going to upstate New York because this professor who I'd studied with in New Mexico closed the school and I moved back. And so I went to see him and he looked at my work and he goes, "What the F are you doing?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "If anybody can draw people, you can." He's like, "Why aren't you integrating the figure into your work?" And I'm one to, with people I respect, when I get feedback, I listen, right? And so I went back to, my work and I reapproached it with kind of this integrative mentality. And this is where that
Before
heart
that, what
and
were you doing then?
mind, I was doing mainly abstract work at that time. Yeah. And so to me, this is where the heart and the mind merge. Where I mean, where for myself, the abstract work really fed this heart space for me. And this isn't the way it is for everybody, I'm sure, because some people take abstract work very mentally, but then mentally, the realistic work, the stuff that makes me focus and dial in, that's what like engages my mind. And so to me, it was this beautiful compromise between these two spaces and this way of integration, right? Um, not and so I'm not like denying any aspect of myself. It's more like I'm accepting that. So, yeah.
No, I felt that recently, I think, in my own work also, because I'd been doing figurative work for so many years now, but I always felt like the abstraction. I wanted to like release my mind a bit, not think so much in the moment and all of that. And I figured like, there was something that just maybe just the way abstraction worked just never spoke to me. And in my own experimentation, I figured like the way I work with material, the way I work with embroideries and materials like these, that is my abstraction. That is like the balance of my mind and my heart. Like in my practice, I need areas of the work where I'm very intentional, where I can like but where I'm also mindless, like I'm so intuitive. And I feel like when both of those come together, like you feel like a lot more satisfied in the sense of you can find a balance and a balance of how you want to push yourself creatively as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It sounds like for you, you were doing like, so your abstraction or that heart centered is through tactile kinesthetic work, right?
Yes.
Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes, I mean, we all have to find whatever that is and speaks to our works for us. And I think that that center place of like integration is huge for any creator. and to deny that is really, yeah, it's hard. I think we all struggle with those places of like, "Oh, I want to do something different, or I want to, like break out of my little box."
Did you think that? Were you on that wild goose of you want to be different, you don't want to do what everybody else is doing?
It had nothing to do with what other people like were doing. It was more just like what I felt would be authentic to me, right? So the idea of like people, even if people hated my work, I would rather them hate it and me know that I was being authentic than people loving it and me feeling like I falsely put myself out there. And it's a really hard dance, especially as you get more successful as an artist. That becomes even harder. It's much
Has it become
easier when
harder
you're
now
that
for
young
you?
person. Absolutely, yeah, and especially because of like my specific career path, because I deal with artists on a daily basis. I have another business where I mentor artists and I teach, and I have so many different extrapolations of what I do, because here at the university I teach curatorial practice. I'm a gallery director, and I've been in arts management since 1998. And because of that, I have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of the art world. And I also understand, especially in these last years, the art world goes in these cycles or these memes, right? Where like something becomes popular. Like at one point, it was like anybody who was from China and doing art, it was like the thing. And then it like then turned to a Middle Eastern thing, and then it switched, and then it kind of and and now we're in a very interesting space where there's the whole, the Black Lives Matter movement, all of these things that are happening that, now like they're, as a curator, I understand why I won't give maybe an exhibition to just anybody anymore, because I have quotas I have to meet for my job. And so as an artist, it puts you in a position where you're like, well, I'm kind of effed in this situation. I don't really have, you know, these things. I don't have a different gender that I identify with. I don't have these areas that I necessarily fit in with. But I also have to step back and understand that I just have to be as authentic as I can in this space, understand that it's other people's moment right now. And when it's, my time, it will be my time. And that's a hard place, I think, for many artists to I guess, accept. And also the sobering truth of what it is to be on the curatorial side and be part of, fitting certain quotas that you need to match, especially when you have, a demographic that you're serving, that it's really important that you're doing things that speak directly to them.
What brought you? You started as an artist. You took these adventures. Then now you're not just one role. There's so many other roles that you play. First, I want to ask you, when looking back, what was the what was the biggest limiting belief that you think you had that opened up everything the moment you let it go? First, let's talk about that. Then I'll ask you something else I have on my mind.
Yeah, so I mean, that is pretty easy for me because it was something that I ran into when I was in India, which was this idea. Yeah, it was that prior to that trip, I kind of always saw that, oh, I think I'm just gonna have some cats and be like a graphic designer and maybe do some art on the side, right? And I don't even really like cats, no offense to people who are cat lovers. So it's kind of it was just that notion of like, I didn't see my world as being a bigger world. I had limited my sense of self. And then when I was in India, I realized for the first time, like, why can't I just be an art? Like, why can't I do art, and why can't I, make art and be in that space, right? and pursue art as a career.
Is there a story behind that you would like to share? Was did something happen, or it was like a just a realization over time?
It was just, it was just a personal realization while I was there. I don't remember any like specific pivotal moment of somebody saying something or something that I did that like transformed that. It was really just like a wait, like I can do this. Like, yeah, I'm like, why am I so like worried or yeah, or thinking I have to be, something different than what I feel is my innate being.
Could it also be because you also broke this shell of discomfort? I truly feel like I've experienced this in my own journey where I feel like there is an area of comfort zone, and then it's like this elastic that we keep pushing, and it starts to pain and pain, and then you know. But then there is this point where that it becomes easy, and you're completely out of your comfort zone. You've done that, and now you feel like you've expanded so much that you're no longer afraid of expanding more, and like you're like, oh, I've now become so uncomfortable that now it's not as overwhelming for me to see these big dreams. Thoughts that may not seem easy then, but you know that you've already been through that discomfort, that your bandwidth of taking that has increased tremendously.
Um, I don't know if I would describe it in the same way for myself. I mean, I understand the theory and I've seen that occur in other aspects of my life.
Because at the end of the day, I think as artists, we're all so scared because, we've born and brought up, and I mean, the popularization that not everybody makes it. Not everybody gets to be the artist that that we're speaking about, talking about. So sometimes even when we know that this is a possibility, what's hard to believe is if that's a possibility for us, for me.
Mm, mm.
That I think that is one of the beliefs that, oh, I know this is possible, but I don't think this is possible for me.
Yeah, I don't think it comes from a way of working through the belief as it comes as much through action because it's only through like putting yourself out there and
That
stepping
is
in,
expanding your
like
beliefs.
a well, yeah, on that level, yeah, like applying for those competitions or applying to galleries and getting the feedback, right? And also being prepared to get really awful feedback, like you have to be. I had an art dealer, probably the best advice I was ever given was that, you need to have skin as thick as a rhinoceros. And it doesn't mean that you can't vibrate at a high frequency and be an awesome person. It means that you've got to be prepared for a level of rejection that most people are not accustomed to on a regular basis. And you've got to be prepared for that rejection to happen continually again and again and again. And no matter what, you keep persevering.
That's true. Okay, now tell me something. What brought you expanding your vision of yourself, not only as an artist, but someone on the curatorial, being a gallery director, being um what did you a what is your own learning? Because I feel like even when I expanded my own role within the arts, from being an artist to now, making running a company in the arts publishing, working with artists, so many artists every day and month. There's so many things that I've learned on the back end. Like, when I was artist, I there were so many things that I never knew how it worked. And sometimes we end up blaming, sometimes you're thinking about, oh, what's wrong with the system? But when you go on the back end and you understand, okay, this is why this was happening, or you what brought you expand yourself as a creative, and how do you think that has holistically helped you in your career so far?
Um, some of it just is not even with choice. I mean, you've got to make money, right? Like, and I personally like to be comfortable. And so that means for me that I want to know my bills are paid every month. I want to know that I can thrive. And also, by having a full-time gig, I give myself greater permission to do whatever I want to do because I'm not solely beholden to like every sale happening. Um, and it becomes more of a special, like a great thing when those sales occur, but it doesn't become something that I'm, absolutely have to have. And I know like a lot of artists who have the privilege of being, married or coupled whose partner works and it gives them all this grace and freedom. And that's similar because it's like they have something there that's providing them with security so they can grow and expand and develop. Um, and so for myself, that was part of it. But the other thing is that I am super invested in understanding how the art market works, how or doesn't, or I should say doesn't work on a lot of levels. But like understanding the nitty-gritty of things, creating better systems and procedures to be more productive and to be able to jump on opportunities with in a flash without having to go through a lot of extra legwork. And so that was part of it. But the other thing is I really like to serve. And I think that for myself, it's great doing my work and it's wonderful when it serves people visually and they get to see it and it inspires them, yada yada. But that doesn't happen on necessarily a daily basis. Whereas like when I'm at my job and I'm doing what I'm doing, I'm serving the students, I'm serving the artists I'm working with, I'm helping boost their careers because I believe as an artist, we have to conspiracize for each other's success. The whole idea of us being in competition is such BS. And it's BS because art is subjective. It's not like you're both lawyers and you're pinning for the same job. It's very, very different. And so for me, it gives me a lot of deep fulfillment to do that. And I also don't think it's healthy to be just in my own incubated space all the time. It's good to step out of that and be there serving others. So you're not just like in this kind of vacuum.
Yeah, it opens up, and I think I think in my own experience, it's given you um so much more perspective. And I think I really like the way that you put it. You feel like you're not only serving yourself, but you're also serving others, which is beneficial not only for someone that you're working with, but I think no matter what, we're always learning. We are always learning by helping other people also. It's just not that we're like, say the more you share, the better you get, the more the knowledge gets. It's never the less. And it's not only a help for someone else, but it's also it keeps expanding you and your own perspective towards things.
Hmm. Yeah, I would echo that it's a growth, right? It requires, and I think it requires a certain type of person to be able to switch hats like I do, and you could probably relate to this, to actually like be there championing, like helping other artists, writing press releases for other artists, doing things to like help their career and not just siloed and just doing it for myself. It also sometimes, to be honest, can be exhausting, right?
And sometimes you have to take your own things on the back seat because you know
Yeah, sometimes that's the case, and other times it's more like, actually, like I need to do something for me today, right? So, and that happens with any sort of give and take role, right? But yeah, so I don't know. And it also can be very discouraging at times because you realize, as I said, when you go, like, because every year, I'm going to all the fairs, I'm going to Art Basel, I'm going to this, I'm going to that, I'm like going to every gallery in every city, and it's wonderful, but it's also, there's this place at which you start to really get sobered, like about the art world and be like, God, like, is it really all it's cracked up to be? And so that's where you've got to come back to your beacon, right? You got to come back to whatever that greater intention is for like why you do what you do, because those things will occur where you're just kind of like demotivated. And you've still just got to put on, your outfit, go into your studio, make art, despite all that exterior noise and all that stuff going on. So,
Where do you feel in your own creative practice you are? What do you feel as a creative right now? Like mind space. You've been doing this for so many years now. I'm sure there's a huge evolution. Can you talk a little bit about the contrast of where you started to where you've come now, and how you feel about yourself today?
okay. Well, first of all, I'll tell a story that will help put that in context. So, when I moved to Portland, Oregon, which was back in, I think, like 2017 or 18 or something in there, probably 17, I, for the first time, integrated everything I owned. And that was stuff that, because I had lived in Australia for 8 years and I had things from, I just had never had everything in one place. And I invited a friend over and I had this friend go through all of my art with me. And at that time, I destroyed art. And I looked at art that I had been doing ever since I was a kid, right? Like a little girl. And I made a decision to destroy a certain portion of that work. And so I threw away 1,200 pounds of art. And the only reason I know that is that was my way, the difference between my way in and way out at the dump. And throwing away that much art, still having a lot, there was a part, like something happened for me within that, which is I became very aware of my own delusions around when I was younger, going to the New York galleries, pitching them, and pissed off that they wouldn't take me. But yet, in this moment, I became so grateful because A, if they had taken me and if my art stayed at that place, I would never be where I am today. And then B, is that it helped me see that my perseverance and my delusion at that time was what kept me creating art, despite maybe not having or being exactly where I thought I should be or I was at that time. Right. And so that to me was a huge part of that evolution, is like looking back and saying, so now when I'm seeing students and their work is mediocre, right? Some of them, not everyone, I don't put a lot of judgment on it. Because I know the potential of growth if somebody has aspiration. And so for myself, I think my evolution has gone from having a lot of really traumatic things happen younger in life, deaths, and things that are very life changing. And those things brought me to a place with my work where my work was focused on me. My work was about me, was about my internal processing, was about, it was very self centered, very Frida Kahlo in that way, right? She was in so much pain. She can't paint about anything else but herself, right? And then as I evolved, my work became more about the we and became much more about like, oh, what's going on with others? What's happening in their interactions? I'm curious about human condition. I studied NLP and coaching and hypnotherapy and all these different modalities to understand more about the human psyche. And then from there, it became more about what's the bigger we, what's the collective we. And so for myself, that evolution is gone in that way. And then now as a creator, it's interesting because like the last huge body of work I did was very politically inclined. And now that's shifting to where like I'm looking at what I call, which is a Japanese word called ma, which basically means negative space. And originally it was used in art to talk about the negative space, between things. But now I'm interested in, because in ma, the idea is that the negative space is more important than the positive space because because of this, because it holds the potential for something greater. And so with my own art, not only as a creator am I looking at, well, what's my ma? You know, here I am in the Midwest, in the middle, right? In this negative space. But also, like, how does this, I'm really interested in the relationships that we have and the ma, so the space between both the relationships we have with self and others. And so how that translates is, how is it that, you know, we are filling that space and that vibration of that space changes so that people can't have good interactions versus um, you know, opening that space, making it more buoyant to allow for it to breathe. And so that's like now what I'm interested in, which is actually interesting because I feel like it's tethering back a little bit more to also a part of me that has been very invested in you know, otherworldly, like esoteric things to a certain degree, but also, you know, so not just looking at who the political figures are, but like let's break that down. Let's look at the deeper stuff now. Let's look at the in between. Let's look at what's kind of hindering those greater conversations or the potentiality for people to be together. I don't know if that makes sense, but
No,
yeah.
absolutely. I think, and I do relate from the part that you said because I don't think I have evolved as a person as much as I have in the past 3 years, ever since I lost my mother, ever since everything that happened, every traumatic experience that has come ever since that, and all the time that we I've had, it's left such an important. It's become, sometimes I keep saying it. It feels like a rebirth to me as a person myself because I really had to teach myself on how to live again, and find it. What really didn't suffice me now was not the person I was before, what I knew before, because I knew now that I had to bring myself together and really find a stronger purpose. And like you said, ascetic in the sense of, like, and that's when I started diving really a lot more spiritually, and that has impacted my work so much, my own ancestry, mythology, everything that was not me, not my loss, but also trying to understand the way things work on such a bigger level than. And like, it didn't, the problem, like, I think my personal was very experience my experience was very personal, but then I figured, like, I needed a much bigger purpose, and sense I wanted to build for myself. And I do understand when you're saying this, because it does really change you and transforms you in a very, like, being on the surface no longer fulfills you. It's like, how deeper can you get? Because you want to make sense of everything. You want to, like, I think there's this drive that pushes you deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that, and I'm sorry to hear about her
No,
passing.
I understand.
It does push us to places that, you know, I don't think that anybody. It's different for everybody, right? But I think that our society is very, at least especially in the Western culture. I don't know exactly how you feel for yourself in India and such, but in the Western culture, there's this sense of, well, we'll give you, you know, a week or two, but then you should just be over it, right? Then it should just be done. And
Absolutely. No, but I don't think it's any longer culture driven. It is also like, especially, I feel like, and I know I feel sometimes so bad and guilty. I come here on this podcast every week. It's been 3 years. And I'm sure sometimes, and I feel that way because I have literally, like, there's no conversation that I cannot have without this experience of my life, because it really has defined me. It really has defined the person I have become. And loss, I feel, is something that feels you like, it does not matter. I still feel like the wound still feels as fresh as it felt on the first day. And then there is a day where I know time has passed, but then I still feel like the same emotion as I had the other day. Sure, some days it's easier, some days it's more harder. But yeah, you're expected. Like people feel like you expected, and I'm not saying only loss and death, but also experience, just in sense. Everything needs to be so fast and quick. Like we are in this world of shorter time spans. Like everything is so fast and quick that there's so many things that should have, you have to be, it should be like 2 weeks, and oh yeah, now life comes in and you deal with it. Sure, we do. I mean, we're all doing everything that we need to, but it's like that you're living, I feel like I'm living a new way. I'm no longer the same person I was before that, and I don't think I can ever go back to that person.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think that that comes back to that gap, that pause, that that space between that, giving ourselves permission to have that space as a creator, as a process, like as processing emotions, as and I don't, it's so funny because you can go on like YouTube or something and you could type in, how to process a death or something like that. And they'll give you all these tools and tricks and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, and this as an artist, and I think every artist understands this intrinsically, is that you come up with your own tools, right? You come up with your own tricks. No one else is going to give you those things.
Yeah. And some days, it's not like something that worked for you in the beginning may work for you now. I have seen that. I feel
No,
like
it's like a
work.
diet.
Yeah. It's like diabetes. It's like something that you have to keep monitoring yourself, because some days I feel like, oh, this has come up. Like now I need to find a way to resolve this, because this hadn't come up in the beginning. Now it has. Like it's like you have to keep, like you are evolving, and your experiences show up in your life in different places, and then you deal with it. You figure out, okay, now this has come up. How do I resolve? How do I manage this?
You won't get over it. It is. It's like a constant. It's just it's a management, right? Yeah, I would agree with that. And having a high level of compassion for yourself. And I think this really applies too to your studio time, to the creative process. This this idea that, you look on Instagram and you're like, how the effing did that person just pump that out in like a heartbeat? Like, and the reality is that it's gonna take you the time it needs to take you.
But also, don't you think this is also because your experience has been that way? Because I do feel like I felt this sense of urgency before this experience of my life. And after this, I realized, like, oh my God, I no longer want to put myself on this wheel of, oh, I'm missing out on life, or I'm missing out on my goals, or I'm missing out on this. I feel like I've become more accepting towards that things are going to happen on their own time, and I'm not even waiting for them to happen, like, oh, there's this. Because in the world that we live with social media, I think the expectation, like, it's like, and then you get this reality check. You're like, no, what was I thinking? And it really takes some really hard experiences in life that give you that check.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's also an acceleration for me of that happens from those sobering experiences of how short life is, right? Like, oh shoot, I don't really have that much more time. My dad is 80. He might live another 10 years. If I only see him twice a year, that's 20 times, right? And there's those things, or those things you want to accomplish. But on the flip side of that is the piece that you're human and that you can only do what you can do. And the only way forward is through. And so there's not like, I'm going to run away from this emotion. I'm going to run away from these things that are happening. I'm going to go through them and embody them and allow them
And with
to
peace
give
and
give
kindness
me
to yourself.
strength. Of course. Yeah, of course. That's always the goal.
Because
Um,
no, I think I was not as kind to myself before. I had this huge self of, and like, if I didn't come through whatever expectation I had of myself. But then, like I said, after this experience, I felt like I had to really rebuild myself, recreate myself, rebirth. And at that point, I really understood that how much more patience, kindness I needed to have for my own self than just feeling like running from one thing to another, one disappointment to another, and just not being able to recognize what I'm experiencing, and being just I think just understanding the pain.
yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is with like the loss of especially a mother or even a father, but there's this parenting notion, right? Of like all of a sudden now you have to give yourself that feminine energy. You have to be the mothering yourself, right? And I think that that's a huge part of it.
It's like you lose the ground. It's like you lose the ground. It's like, I feel like I loved how Daniel, she also lost her mother, and we had this conversation, and she spoke about, like, it's like you lose a part of yourself, and now it's like you're relearning how to, like, you lose this one limb and leg, and now you're relearning you will never be on your 2 feet. You'll walk again, but you learn to walk in 1 feet, and you'll always feel that void, and now you'll have to teach yourself again on how to do that, because there's nobody who's going to tell you to how to do that. You will have to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one perspective. And then I know for like myself in because I also lost my mom and a sibling as well. But like within the loss of my mother, like that relationship was not great. And so it almost felt like the opposite to me. It felt like I was one-legged in until that point, and then I was given the ability to stand without this weight. Um, and there was, don't get me wrong, there were still things that, as a mother, she provided for me and was a great role model for me. But it also felt very liberating too. So for me, it's very interesting. And this is why I love hearing about the experiences, because for me, it was almost like the total opposite, right? Whereas, and my mom, even from a young age, had me doing all of my stuff myself. Like she never did things for me. It was like, you do your own laundry, you make your lunches since I was 6. You want to find that number, here's the phone book. Like it was like
No, I can relate to this thing. What's strange is I grew up in a family which wasn't the most stable in the sense, like, emotionally. And I was the third child, and I never felt as provided emotionally, with their own due reasons and etc. And I never had the time with my mother as much. And I moved out when I was very young, when I was 17, and I stayed on my own for so many years, over 10 years, 12 years. And then I just, for the first time in my life, the year before COVID, that was the first year I felt like I had her to myself. Like, I finally had the chance in life where I got what I wanted in the sense of her time, and that's just, I only had, and I feel fortunate to at least have experienced that. But also, there was so much anger and frustration in me that felt like, there was I now I felt my time had come. Now I felt like, I could finally, and that is when she left. And I was so angry for so much of my time in life. Like, I felt like, I felt like this, if you it I felt like this kid who always wanted, like, this doll, and then when she finally got it, and, like, you had it for 10 minutes and somebody snatched it away. And just the feeling of something not having ever, but then having it, knowing what it felt like for a millisecond, and somebody just took it. So I do relate to that. And I think relationships are so complex that sometimes, you know just, I think, as specifically parental, no matter how good and bad, we have it. Complex and easy. There will always be good days, bad days. But just like, say, at least in my own experience, just like you said, being a mother, having someone or parent, your own parents, it's just like a defining source of who you are, where you come from, just to know how also. And it's like, then after if they're not around, it's like, now you really have to make your own ground. Like, you really have to, like, no matter how stable or unstable that ground was, now you don't have it any longer, you have to create your own. I think that in itself is, can be liberating for someone and can be challenging, but at the end of the day, it does teach you a lot.
Oh, it has to. Hopefully for the better. It's interesting when you're talking about this kind of impermanence to a certain degree, right? This idea that, and I think artists, like when it comes to creation, it's a very similar thing. You're creating something, you're creating, a little, like a being into the world, right? And then you kind of have to let it go, right? You get to spend all this time with it, but then you've got to allow it to find its own place in the world. And so there's something almost parallel to me about those experiences where we have to learn this level of like detachment around around what we make. We have to like be willing to release it and be joyful for the time that we did get to spend with that work or whatever, for better or for worse. I mean, it's not always great.
Yeah, I think what really loss does to you, no matter any kind of, it really humbles you for whatever little you had. It also tells you that you could have more, like if you really push yourself in our own limiting beliefs. But it also reminds you that we need to be grateful for whatever we did have, I think, on the flip side.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree.
Thank you so much. This was such a nice conversation. I can't believe we've already spoken for an hour. And thank you so much for your vulnerability. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I do think that you have really left a lot of important things for us to think about. But I have one more last question. What do you have as an advice for someone who's listening to this episode, who's, let's say, and I do not think about age when I ask this, because I feel like our physical age versus wherever we are in our life could be very different ages. So, what do you have someone who's in their early, where they're just trying to figure out this feeling stuck or unable to push themselves through? What do you have advice specifically for women? Because, of course,
Oh gosh. I mean, I think the biggest thing is don't expect to always feel creative, just show up. And so for myself, and I see it happening with others, it's this idea that if you feel void of ideas, don't worry about it. Just put your pen to the paper, put your brush to the canvas, just keep moving. And that would be my biggest advice. Like, keep moving and keep putting it out there no matter what. Your work is going to change over time. And so what? So, what if people see your older work and it's not as good as your newer work? Don't worry about it. Just keep doing.
pushing, keep giving.
Yeah. And moving forward. Hmm.
Well done. Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful advice. But where can people who are listening, where can they find you, look at your work, support you?
Yeah. So my tanmayabingham.com is my website, or everything else is under Tanmaya Bingham. So yeah, and anybody who, that's my Instagram, etc. And then anybody who wants one-on-one mentoring or things of that nature, or taking art classes, my company is Visual Artist Capital, and it's just visualartistcapital.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tanmaya. It was so nice speaking to you. I hope to see you soon again.
Likewise, and thanks so much for this opportunity. It was quite a delight. So,
Absolutely. See you.
okay, take care. Bye.